This is the lead Washington state auditor on the daycare fraud in Washington, which apparently we don't have any, but we are questioning all $415,579,473 in federal program costs it incurred during the audit period. $415 million we're now investigating. We don't really know where that money went. What was it spent on? Not sure. We're going to have to do a little bit of a deep dive. Let's get into it. Here we go. Como interview with that same person. Listen to what she has to say.
I'm here because you felt the need to address this issue publicly. So what I want to ask you about is why did you feel the need to address it publicly, and what do you hope to accomplish by that?
Well, I want to calm the public down. I want to calm Washingtonians down. What happened in Minnesota happened in Minnesota. So don't conflate what happened there with what's happening in Washington state.
That statement right there, that is basically all you need to know. Don't conflate what's happened in Somalia, Minnesota, Minneapolis, with what's happening in Seattle, what's happening in Washington state. Don't conflate that. When they come out and say that, when they say, hey, we need to have a public talk about this, don't conflate the two. That means, books are cooked. What's going on the same topic?
Just talked about transparency and accountability. And you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about DCYF and the allegations that have swirled around that agency. Since you and I talked, there's been an audit to suggest there were $500 million in two programs that did not have adequate controls, that there's been $2 million in overpayments to providers, and that the state auditor went 4 years without any sort of provider records. Given that information now, would you call for an outside audit of DCYF?
Well, my understanding from what the auditors talked about, both in the
state auditor is the one giving us information right now. State auditor auditing themselves. Yeah. Supposed to be independent? I don't think so.
Past, and I think as recently as today, that there's continuing audits that the auditor's office is going to do. Our job is to make sure that our clients that we represent, DCYF and other state agencies, are taking those audits very seriously and do everything they can to make sure that they're not going to have that kind of problems moving forward. I do want to distinguish what we've seen and heard about. There's, every state government, every state program that gets taxpayer dollars needs to work better with those dollars and make sure that we're treating them seriously. That is very different in my mind from allegations of fraud. And we want to make sure that there's a distinction between allegations of criminal fraud and allegations of, just how we best use our taxpayer dollars. So I will let the auditor speak for themselves. I think it's really important. And one of the things that makes Washington state great is that we have an independent auditor that can do that work on behalf of the public. They issue very transparent and thorough reports on many, many state agencies. And I think that work needs to continue. And it's really important that the state agency leads, the governor's office, and the rest of us take those audits very seriously.
Complaints come into your office?
Sorry, say it again.
Have you had any fraud complaints come into your office?
Fraud complaints related to what?
Related to DCYF.
Oh, sure. I mean, we've all watched the news, right? There's been a lot of reports on fraud that came into our office. Most of them are what I would view as pretty baseless allegations, but we take those allegations seriously. We work with our client agents.
And what that would be is people, saying, hey, I saw a guy with the camera go up to the front doorstep of a daycare and nobody there and there's no kids. And, there's going to be a bunch of that. But when you've got this going on, it's one of those things where you're like, look over here, don't look there. And why is that? Well, because something is going on. And we're going to find out what's going on a little bit. Como News has learned of alleged serious oversight and accountability gaps in the Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF. That's what they refer to that as. Washington State Auditor told Como News that DCYF lacked access to provider-level data in the last 4 statewide audits. Okay. All right. She said the data is needed to fully track where that money is going. So we don't know where over $415 $15 million has gone. We don't have adequate tracking for it. Sounds an awful lot like the $22 billion or the $24 billion in California, where it all went out on the homeless industrial complex, and nobody's really sure where it went because we don't have adequate controls for an audit. Interesting. This comes as concerns about the child care funding make headlines in Washington state and the rest of the country. Well, I mean, you've got a crazy situation where there is some pretty odd looking stuff going on in Minneapolis, right? And if it's happening in Minneapolis, it's happening here as well. We've got a big Somali community here. And it's not just Somalians. It's not just their daycares, but it's fraud in general in these big Democrat-run states along these kind of programs, whether it is transportation program, whether it's food, SNAP benefits, whatever, whether it's daycare, whether it's, the list just goes on. All these states have these big, massive, hundreds of millions of dollars of budget, and they're just shuffling money out. And who knows where it's going? And they don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. It's just, here you go. And so, you're putting together, you don't have a full, complete picture of what's going on, but then you throw a Nick Shirley in there, and he's just kind of like gasoline onto a fire, right? Because we've already had so many convictions in Minneapolis over the fraud there that we know. And that was a daycare feeding program. I think that is what that was. Just absolutely mind-blowing. There are no audit conclusions yet, but at this stage of the audit, McCarthy said the auditors have not seen any evidence of fraud. Okay. Again, yep. All right. I'll believe you. That said, McCarthy said the agency remains high risk and points to oversight gaps in the prior 4 years' audits. She noted fiscal year 24 audit questioned more than $400 million in federal program costs incurred. They are probably the most risky of all the departments in state government. Oh, okay. She added, it's one of the highest risk agencies in state government due to the scope, size, and vulnerable population it serves. Okay. So what you're saying is there's a pretty good chance that what we're talking about is some real fraud. And here we've got, our Attorney General, Washington State Attorney General, calls daycare fraud allegations baseless. They're baseless, despite audit findings showing major oversight gaps. Well, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Do we know this absolutely? No. But hey, if you got a bunch of daycares that really aren't operating the way they should, and you've got hundreds of millions of dollars, let's just say there's a chance. Brown's comments come amid a series of troubling findings from the Washington State Auditor's Office, which has repeatedly flagged DCYF as one of the highest risk agencies in state government due to its size and just about what we talked about. $400 million in federal program costs, not because fraud was proven, but because documentation required under federal law was missing. Uh-oh. What do we got going on there? But here's kind of the underlying, is this what's going on? Washington Somali run daycare took $210,000 in taxpayer funds in 2025, but no child care business appears to exist. Where is it? Where are the children? Were you there before hours, after hours? It's one of those things where we've had so many examples of this. I don't have child care. There's no child care here. Is this Somali run daycare? And they're like, no. Kristen Mag, another influencer, noted that there are 539 child care centers in Washington state that list Somali as the primary language, and most don't even give a street address. I've looked at probably a couple hundred of those online. I don't know how many of these are submitting fraudulent claims for state grants and subsidies, but I have a strong hunch the number is not zero. Well, when you got $415 million in funds that you're not really all that sure about, there's a distinct possibility. What you're saying is, there's a chance, right? There's a chance. How about this little gem of a nugget here? Democratic lawmaker moves to conceal Washington state daycare provider info amid Somali fraud allegations. Wellman was one of the primary sponsors of the Keep Washington Working Act, the bill that made Washington a so-called sanctuary state. And critics of the bill suggest her new legislation is an attempt to shield illegal immigrants from federal authorities. Why on earth would she be doing that? If everything's on the up and up, got nothing to squawk about, right? Well, yeah. And we continue. Washington daycares face mounting scrutiny on social media. But remember, the Attorney General says, we've got instances of that happening, but yeah, most of them aren't really anything. And then we've got the state auditor saying, well, it's $415 million, but it's just because we don't have the adequate, supporting data to really understand what's going on there. And you're just left with, okay, all right. I'm going to go with there's probably zero chance that there is zero fraud happening here. I'm gonna hang with that. Daycares and child care centers across Washington are facing an onslaught of scrutiny, and you know what? They're getting worried. Scrutiny traces back to a viral video out of Minnesota. Okay, we know that. Our first stop, the provider told us she had seen posts claiming her daycare was closed, but when we arrived unannounced, she opened the doors and showed us children inside. Oh, okay. I'm here. I'm working hard. I have a legitimate business. They send licensors into our homes. They check our business. But there's enough of these details where you don't, it's unknown, right? You don't know where this money is gone. If the state auditor doesn't know where the money is gone, and if you've got all these businesses that you can't even work out if they're operational, you're kind of left to just go to yourself, well, yeah, I can see fraud happening here on a large, large scale. And that's all that reasonable people are thinking, is that, yeah, there's a pretty high probability. Now, is there a cover-up going on? I mean, that's when somebody comes out and says, what happened in Somaliland is happened in Somaliland. It's not here in Washington. I mean, that's when you're like, okay, the fact that you wanted to sit down and bring that up in that manner to Como, which is noted local media company, right? It just kind of makes you think, yeah, books are cooked on this. That's what it makes me think. Well, high probability, you got some legit fraud. If there is there legit fraud? This is fraud, legit fraud. Yeah, you know what I mean? After our interview, the provider contacted us again, asking her identity be concealed. She told us that if fraud exists, investigators should handle it, but warned against harassment driven by online accusations. You hear about all this harassment. I'm not seeing the harassment. I am literally seeing people questioning where millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars are actually going. Where's it going? Despite the allegations circulating online, there are currently no evidence from the government or the court system that these providers are engaged in fraud. Okay. All right. Yeah. So you say, so you tell us, but you just start to put everything together. It looks wildly different than the story we're being told, doesn't it? I personally think Washington State's got a bunch of fraud going on. Why wouldn't it? You're bringing these folks in. You're a sanctuary state. You're Seattle. You're a sanctuary city. And I know these daycares are licensed through the state, but they're predominantly located in King County. And what happened in Minneapolis, I think, has happened all over the United States. And so Washington State, specifically King County, specifically Seattle area, South King County, why wouldn't they be doing the same thing, bilking hundreds of millions of dollars into the billions collectively? Why wouldn't they be doing that? I mean, it's worked so well for so many different programs. Minnesota, Why wouldn't they try that elsewhere? Look at how long Minnesota got away with this. I mean, forever, decade plus, something like that, right? I mean, you're just like, how did that happen? And nobody said anything. Well, they did. And leadership ignored it. So if leadership in Minnesota is ignoring things, do you think there's a probability? I would say the probability of Washington State ignoring the same type of data or whistleblowers is highly likely to be more than zero. How about that? Yeah, it's not going to be zero. To what scale? That is the question that we're all kind of asking. Like, okay, so 415 million is questionable here. What's the actual true number of the fraud involved? We're going to find out. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell. I'll be talking about this a ton more. All right. Thanks again for being here. We'll catch up in the next episode. Bye for now.